And what is up, everybody? Okay, just finished watching Pixel Dan doing his podcast, Geek Easy, and I love what Pixel Dan does as far as his toy reviews and stuff like that. And I haven't even seen the new Fantastic Four, but you guys already, those of you who've been watching my channel know that I've sworn off any and every 20th Century Fox Marvel movie. If it's a Marvel comic and 20th Century Fox is trying to make a movie out of it, I want nothing to do with it. And I don't need to say anything because for those of you who saw Fantastic Four probably agree with the fact that it just absolutely flopped. And okay, so what winds up happening is he's talking about somebody mentioned to him how basically now that everybody's getting this whole 80s nostalgia. Like, I was born in 82, okay, so that was early enough for me to see like some of the cartoons of the 80s. Prime example, G.I. Joe: Real American Hero. The first comic was released 1982. Snake Eyes is just as old as I am. That's right, Snake Eyes is 33 years old. So that then of course 2 years after that, in 84, came Transformers. By that time I was 2, and I knew what G.I. Joe was. I knew what Transformers were. I knew what some of the I would watch that stuff religiously. Then of course watching Voltron, and because Voltron was released in the US in the 80s. Then of course you got Ninja Turtles, which was until 87. So by that time I was 5 years old, and I was able to understand more or less what was going on. Ultimately into the the early 90s. So a lot of those 80s toys, like and cartoons, Cops, Sky Commanders, Captain Power, and Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. Yeah, I remember that. What else, man? Mask. A bunch of other different things. I don't really remember Computer Warriors, but apparently I was around for that. I was alive during that time. But let's see what else. Just so many. And Thundercats especially. I was around for all. I was around for all that. Silverhawks. I was around for that. So when it comes to having this nostalgia for that, having it being already past the turn of the century into the halfway through the next decade, but people are still talking about the 80s, and he wants to know when is it that people are going to start talking about the 90s. Here's the problem. By the time 1990 rolled around, you see, back in the 80s, keep in mind, in the 80s there weren't too many comic book superhero cartoons. Now granted, G.I. Joe and Transformers had their own Marvel comic, and so as well as Rom the Space Knight, but that was based off of the toy line. It was advertisement for a toy line. We're talking about I'm talking about comic books that were strictly comic books, and didn't necessarily have toys for them, didn't have shows made about them or anything like that. In the 80s, you had Spider-Man, and then Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Then you had Galactic Guardians, the Superpowers team, for DC. You didn't really have those are the only two like main comic book cartoon shows that were out. So nobody was really getting all hyped up about those, as especially when Spider-Man's Amazing Friends didn't have its own toy line, as well as the only Marvel toys you could hope to get at the time were either Secret Wars or Mego. So there was no Iceman figure, there was no Firestar figure. You could hope to find maybe the Spider-Man Secret Wars figure. That was it. Superpowers had its own line. Okay, cool. But I don't know. I knew a lot of kids that had it. But when it comes to stuff like Transformers, and especially Cops and Ninja Turtles, where these especially G.I. Joe, where the cartoon was made specifically for the toy line, that's where things got really interesting. Okay? And that's where everybody's nostalgia comes from. It's not so much the show, but it's definitely the toys. Because especially when I watch the show now as an adult, I realize certain things about it. It's like, man, this is kind of corny. Certain things about certain shows, okay, that were made specifically for the advertisement of the toy line. Prime example, Cops. Okay, the Central Organization of Police Specialists. Okay, they stood about this tall and had the exact same articulation as a G.I. Joe, with the exception of wrist articulation. Had the kung fu grip, but they were able to move their hand at least like this. They had the cut at the wrist, which was good. But that show didn't last for very long. And then I'm watching it as an adult. It's like, man, this is kind of corny. They could do a lot more with it, but it, still kind of corny. By the time the 90s rolled around, you didn't have that much of it. You had Police Academy the series, which as a kid, to me, it was funny. And then, of course, having the toy line for that cartoon was pretty funny. If you ever watch, seriously, once this is over, look up the original Police Academy the series cartoon intro. Hilarious. You had that. That's when all of a sudden you started getting. Let's see. I think it was 1990 or 1991. 1991 when Nickelodeon released Rugrats, Doug, Ren and Stimpy, and Rugrats, Doug, Ren and Stimpy, and they had four cartoons that they had put out. Rugrats, Doug, Ren and Stimpy, and I forget. That's where all that came out at the same time. Then Cartoon Network comes out. At the time, the most popular, you had then on top of that, you had the Disney Afternoon, which was a 2-hour block of. Granted, DuckTales was out in the 80s, came out in the mid 80s, but you had Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers, which came out, I believe, 1990. You had Darkwing Duck. You had Tailspin. You had, shortly after that, Goof Troop. Then they tried, introducing a bunch of other cartoons. Aladdin got his own show. Then you try putting out stuff like Pirates of Dark Water, which didn't last very long. Skeleton Warriors, which didn't last very long. Botsmaster did not last long at all. Vortex, not at all. Exo Squad, which was great, phenomenal show. Even as an adult, as far as the storytelling for it, the animation, the art, the action sequence, and the dialogue, everything about it was great. It was even as an adult, you can enjoy it. Didn't last for very long. The stuff that was lasting long was Disney, was Marvel, because that's when Marvel put out X-Men. That's when Marvel put out Spider-Man. That's when DC put out Batman the Animated Series. That's when there was Animaniacs. That's when there was The Adventures of Superman. Then the New Adventures of Batman and Superman, which eventually led into Justice League in 2001. Or was it 2002? It was probably 2000. Yeah, it was 2001. And the 90s cartoons, it was something complete. like it's not even in the same. It's like it was, they were in a league of their own, you know. The majority of the more popular ones were the stuff that were basically based off of either something live action or, you know, granted they had a lot of those in the 80s as well, but like even like The Mask, as funny as that cartoon was, but then they also had the Ace Ventura cartoon. They also had a Dumb and Dumber cartoon. I mean, seriously, this is like that's when Jim Carrey ruled the world. You know, he had Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber out. He was coming out with Ace Ventura 2. The man ruled the world. Then, of course, came Power Rangers, and a slew of other Japanese imported, Americanized, TV shows. You know, it was all just a completely different league of their own. And the more popular stuff was the stuff that people, the only reason why anybody knows what Darkwing Duck was is because it was a spinoff of DuckTales. And not to mention, it was Disney. Slap Disney on it. Of course, is going to sell well. Same thing with Goof Troop, Tailspin, and Aladdin's like, come on, that's off the movie you just made. So of course that's gonna, that cartoon's gonna do well. But then when you get shows like Skeleton Warriors, when you get shows like Mighty Max, more or less cast it off somewhere, because it's like they try, or even Dragonflies, the stuff that they try going mainstream. Then when that doesn't work, you either got to wake up ridiculously early in the morning to try to watch it. And even Bruno the Kid. Bruno the Kid was hilarious. But the 90s was filled with so many different flops. The 80s too, don't get me wrong. Sectars is, but the difference between the 80s and the 90s was the fact that in the 80s they made the toy line, then they made the cartoon. And then depending on how well the toy line was selling, would depend on how long they kept the cartoon on. Completely different in the 90s. If the show wasn't doing well, it wasn't going to get a toy line. And shows like Bruno the Kid, I didn't even know what Bruno the Kid was until by this time it was already canceled. And Wendy's put out kids' meals toys for the show. That was my first introduction to Bruno the Kid. I had no idea Bruce Willis was in it, and then of course the idea behind it is just was just hilarious. Dialogue was great, and the fact that it was Bruce Willis doing the voiceover acting. It was great, but that couldn't hold a candle to Gargoyles, which is a show that's been long forgotten. Doesn't hold a candle to Batman the Animated Series. Batman the Animated Series pretty much set a new standard for what was supposed to be a superhero cartoon. Then shortly after that, and then on the same channel, on top of that, on the Fox Kids network, you had Batman the Animated Series, and you had X-Men come out. Fox Kids ruled the world at that time, man. It was phenomenal. It was great. But it was something completely different from anything that came out of the 90s. I mean, out of the 80s. It's completely different. And then for the stuff that was the most popular in the 90s, because they're talking about the whole nostalgia kick, because they made the Transformers movie, the G.I. Joe, and they're even coming out with Gem. That's right, Gem. Granted, that movie, I saw the trailer for that movie, and that movie has got nothing. It's like something completely different from what the Gem cartoon was. From the few episodes I've seen, because that was a girl show. It was a girl show. My dad would never let me watch it. I wasn't allowed to watch the classic My Little Pony either. And to have the stuff revamped, because when Hasbro had the hub and they were playing Transformers Generation 1, they were playing G.I. Joe Real American Hero, they were playing Gem, you know, to be able to reintroduce those old cartoons for their old toy lines, you know, for their own intellectual property, was genius. So now when you got Gem coming out and Molly Ringwald, you know, an 80s heartthrob, you know, to be in a movie made for an 80s toy line, you know, it's just, you know, it's great. It's great. But to try to say that okay, when are we gonna have you know, the nostalgia kick for the 90s? Probably not gonna happen. Why? Because how many times you gonna remake Aladdin? Okay, how are you gonna do, like, how are you gonna do anything Disney really? Even especially it's like they already did Batman Begins. They already brought back Batman. They already brought in X-Men. And then because of that, with everything going on with comic book movies, stuff like Mighty Max, Exo Squad, even Botsmaster. A lot of the cartoons that I'm mentioning right now, King Arthur and the Knights of Justice, the Double Dragon cartoon. A lot of people did not like these cartoons. Street Sharks, really? You really want to? It's like you really want to make movies for Street Sharks or Extreme Dinosaurs? You know, a lot of the stuff that, like I said, it was a completely different league. It's just something. The 90s and 80s cartoons is just something completely different. And are there some things from are there some 90s cartoons that absolutely deserve live action treatment? Oh yes. Are they gonna get it? There's no supply. If there's no supply and demand for it, I mean, the closest thing they had was that one indie toy company remaking the Skeleton Warriors, but he's only making the villains. You know, if he'd have remade some of the heroes, then try to produce a little bit more of a demand for it, and then of course, maybe, just maybe, something could happen. But as popular as the Skeleton Warriors toy line was, the cartoon was, again, it was very short-lived. The show didn't even see an end. At least with Exo Squad, you saw an end between the human and Neo-Sapien War. However, that ended prematurely because there was a new war about to start, and it just left you hanging, man. Same thing with Botsmaster. Botsmaster, it kind of, it was a very ridiculously open ending. ZZ, basically gets, blows the lid off of RM Corp. So now the government's going to be, basically like froze all their assets and going to do a full-on investigation of the RM Corp. But then the RM Corp has, something else up their sleeve. So is the, different things like that. King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. I don't think they ever made it back to New York. Double Dragon. I'm not even gonna get into Double Dragon, but I'm pretty sure they never got their mother back, and I don't even know if they ever met their father. Let's see what else. Yeah, a couple of other things. Reboot came out in the 90s, and I don't think it didn't really become too popular until after basically Bob was presumed dead, and Enzo became Matrix. You know, he grew into an adult and got his eye slashed out, and had to start using a gun. Stuff like that. It's hard to say if anybody's ever going to miss that stuff enough to even try bringing it back. See, back in the '80s was, like for me, it was like 33 years. It's like, and a lot of the stuff, bringing a lot of the stuff back. I mean, I was 24. I just turned 25 when they brought Transformers to the big screen. But it was 22 years after. It was 22 years after the original comic book. I was 27 when they came out with G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra. 27 years after the original comic book. So to be trying to miss stuff from the 90s. Now keep in mind, you might remember a lot of this stuff, but none of this stuff was really none of that. The real cool stuff was really mainstream. The stuff that were like prime example, like how many, like the Predator toy line. Predator was a rated R movie. Why was there an action figure line for kids for it? Same thing with RoboCop. Same thing with Aliens. These were rated R franchises, but kids had the toys for them. So having the having new Predator movies, having the Terminator, like the Terminator toy line as well. Toy line for kids for rated R movies. Terminator 2. Stuff like that happening all the time. There wasn't enough stuff. There wasn't, and considering everything just keeps getting brought back to the point where there really isn't any 90s nostalgia, because all the mainstream stuff from the 90s is still going. The mainstream stuff from the 80s was just brought back, and thanks to the fact that everything can be rebooted and recycled again, it's not going anywhere. With the exception of G.I. Joe, unfortunately, because they had something good, but then they dropped it. Well, that's pretty much what I have to say about Pixel Dan's podcast comment with that. I'm done talking. You guys have a good night.